The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant Michael Thompson adjusted his red tunic for what would become the most memorable day of his 15-year career as a Queen's Guard. The familiar weight of his bearskin hat and the practiced stillness that had become second nature to him were about to be tested in ways no training manual could have prepared him for. At precisely 9:30 a.m., as tourists began gathering behind the palace gates with their cameras ready, Michael noticed something unusual in the crowd. A small figure in a wheelchair sat quietly beside an elderly woman, both dressed in their finest clothes despite the obvious wear and patches that spoke of modest means. The child, no more than 8 years old, wore a plastic crown that had seen better days and clutched a handmade sign that simply read, "I want to be a guard like you." What struck Michael most wasn't the sign itself, but the way the boy's eyes never left the guards. While other children ran around pointing and laughing, this young visitor sat perfectly still, studying every detail of their uniforms, their posture, their unwavering dedication to duty. There was something different about this child's gaze, a mixture of admiration and longing that spoke to something deeper than casual tourist curiosity. The grandmother, noticing Michael's subtle glance toward them, gently wheeled the boy closer to the fence. She whispered something in the child's ear, and his face lit up with a smile that could have powered the entire palace. Michael felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the thick wool of his uniform. This wasn't just another day of standing guard. This was becoming something far more significant. As the morning progressed, Michael found himself acutely aware of the boy's presence. During the changing of the guard ceremony, he noticed how the child sat straighter in his wheelchair, how his small hands mimicked the movements of the marching soldiers, how his lips moved silently as if he were calling out the commands himself. The other tourists were busy taking selfies and chatting loudly, but this boy was absorbing every moment with the intensity of someone who understood the honor and responsibility that came with the red coat and tall black hat. The grandmother appeared to be explaining something to the boy, pointing at different aspects of the ceremony. Michael could see her lips moving, sharing stories that brought tears to her eyes and made the boy nod with serious understanding. There was clearly a deeper connection to the royal family and the guards than simple tourism. This was personal, meaningful, and it was about to become even more profound. When the ceremony concluded and the crowds began to disperse, Michael expected the boy and his grandmother to leave like everyone else. Instead, they remained seated by the fence, the boy still staring intently at the guards who had resumed their posts. The grandmother checked her watch and then looked around uncertainly, as if gathering courage for something she had been planning for a very long time. It was then that Michael noticed the tears in the boy's eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming emotion and unfulfilled longing. The child pressed his face against the fence rails, his small fingers gripping the iron bars as if trying to get just a little bit closer to his heroes. The grandmother placed her weathered hand on his shoulder and began speaking to him in hushed, urgent tones. Michael realized he was witnessing something extraordinary, a moment when duty, compassion, and humanity were about to intersect in ways that would challenge every rule he had been taught to follow. The strict protocols that governed his behavior as a Queen's Guard were clear: maintain position, avoid interaction with the public, uphold the dignity of the monarchy through unwavering discipline. But sometimes rules exist to be transcended by something greater. The boy raised his small hand in a perfect military salute, his back as straight as his wheelchair would allow, his eyes filled with respect and hope. Michael felt every fiber of his being respond to that salute, to the pure admiration and courage it represented. In that moment, he understood that being a royal guard wasn't just about protecting buildings or maintaining traditions. It was about embodying the very best of what service and dedication could mean to others. As other guards maintained their stoic positions, Michael made a decision that would ripple through the palace, the media, and the hearts of millions around the world. He was about to discover that sometimes the greatest acts of service happen when we choose humanity over protocol, when we recognize that true honor lies not in rigid adherence to rules, but in understanding the spirit behind them. Michael felt his heart racing beneath the scarlet wool of his tunic as he made the decision that would change everything. Breaking centuries of protocol, he slowly turned his head toward the boy in the wheelchair and, with the slightest movement, returned the child's perfect military salute. The moment their eyes met, something magical happened. The boy's face transformed with pure joy, his entire being radiating the kind of happiness that only comes from having an impossible dream suddenly become real. The grandmother gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth as she witnessed this unprecedented breach of royal guard protocol. She had brought her grandson here hoping he might catch a glimpse of his heroes, but she never imagined one of them would acknowledge his presence so directly and meaningfully. Tears began streaming down her cheeks as she watched her grandson's reaction to this simple yet profound gesture of recognition and respect. Other tourists who witnessed the exchange stopped in their tracks, phones lowering as they realized they were seeing something extraordinary unfold. The usual chatter and noise of the crowd gradually faded into hushed whispers as more people became aware that something special was happening between the stoic guard and the child in the wheelchair. Even the other guards, trained to maintain their positions regardless of distractions, found themselves subtly observing the interaction. The boy, emboldened by Michael's response, began to mouth words of gratitude. His lips moved silently, but his message was clear. "Thank you." Michael felt a lump forming in his throat as he watched this brave young soul, confined to a wheelchair but with a spirit that soared higher than the palace towers themselves. The child's courage and determination reminded him why he had chosen this profession in the first place, not for glory or recognition but to serve something greater than himself. As minutes passed, more details of the boy's story began to emerge through the grandmother's quiet explanations to nearby onlookers, who had approached with respectful curiosity. The child, named Timothy, had been born with a rare condition that affected his mobility, but had never dampened his fascination with the royal guards. His bedroom walls were covered with pictures of the changing of the guard ceremony, and he had spent months saving his pocket money for this trip to London. Timothy's father had served in the British Army before his son was born, and had filled the boy's imagination with stories of honor, duty, and service to country. When Timothy's father was deployed overseas, the boy would wear his plastic crown and march around their small apartment, dreaming of the day when he might stand proudly in a red tunic and tall black hat. The cruel irony that his physical condition would prevent him from ever realizing this dream only made his admiration for the guards more poignant and pure. Michael found himself thinking about his own son, safely at home with his wife, running and playing without a care in the world. Here was a child who faced challenges Michael couldn't even imagine, yet radiated more genuine appreciation for the guard service than most adults ever expressed. The boy's joy at receiving a simple acknowledgement was both heartwarming and heartbreaking, a reminder of how powerful small acts of human kindness could be. The grandmother, sensing that this moment was becoming something bigger than either she or her grandson had anticipated, began to worry about getting the guards in trouble. She started to wheel Timothy away, whispering that they should go before anyone got upset with the kind soldier who had been so nice to them. But Timothy gently grabbed the wheels of his chair, stopping their movement, his eyes pleading with his grandmother to let him stay just a little longer. Michael watched this silent negotiation between the boy and his grandmother, understanding, without words, that Timothy wasn't ready to leave this magical moment behind. The child had waited his entire young life for this encounter, had dreamed of it countless nights, and now that it was happening, each second felt precious and irreplaceable. The guard realized that his simple salute had opened a door that couldn't easily be closed. Other guards began to take notice of what was happening, their training warring with their humanity as they observed Michael's interaction with the boy. Some looked concerned about the breach of protocol, while others seemed moved by the obvious emotional impact this exchange was having on both the child and their colleague. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Michael made another decision that would later be discussed in security briefings and training sessions for years to come. Maintaining his position but allowing his rigid posture to soften slightly, he began a slow, barely perceptible nod of encouragement toward Timothy. It was another small gesture, but to the boy, It felt like receiving a knighthood from the Queen herself. The connection between guard and child was strengthening with each passing moment, creating ripples that would soon reach far beyond the palace gates. What happened next would be remembered as one of the most touching moments in the modern history of the royal guards. Timothy, inspired by Michael's continued acknowledgement, slowly reached into a small bag attached to his wheelchair and pulled out a carefully wrapped package. His grandmother looked surprised, clearly unaware that her grandson had brought something to give to the guards. With trembling hands, the boy began to unwrap what appeared to be a small handmade item. Inside the tissue paper was a miniature red guard uniform that Timothy had painstakingly created himself, complete with tiny buttons made from bottle caps, and a small bearskin hat fashioned from black fabric. The craftsmanship was remarkable for a child, every detail lovingly recreated from countless hours of studying photographs and videos. Attached to the uniform was a note written in a child's careful handwriting. For the bravest soldiers in the world, thank you for keeping everyone safe. Michael felt his composure beginning to crack as he observed the boy holding up his handmade gift. The pure innocence and generosity of the gesture, the hours of work that had gone into creating something. To honor the guards he admired, the selfless desire to give rather than receive. It all combined into a moment that transcended duty and protocol. This wasn't just a tourist interaction. This was a profound expression of respect and gratitude from one soul to another. The grandmother, now understanding her grandson's secret plan, began to tear up again as she helped Timothy navigate closer to the fence. She had raised this special boy since his parents deployed overseas, watching him face each day with courage and optimism despite his physical challenges. Seeing him now, offering his precious creation to his heroes, filled her with pride and overwhelming emotion. This moment was the culmination of months of Timothy's dreams and preparation. Other guards along the fence began to notice the small drama unfolding near Michael's position. Word spread quietly through their ranks about the boy with the handmade uniform, the child who had saluted with perfect military precision, the young visitor whose genuine admiration had moved their colleague to break protocol. Some guards found themselves struggling to maintain their stoic expressions as they glimpsed Timothy's earnest face and his carefully crafted gift. Michael realized he faced an impossible choice. Military regulations were crystal clear about accepting gifts from the public, and breaking ranks to interact with civilians was strictly forbidden. Yet here was a child whose pure heart and generous spirit demanded recognition, whose courage in creating and offering this gift deserved more than cold adherence to rules. The guard understood that sometimes the greatest service to the crown came from serving the people with humanity and compassion. A small crowd had gathered to watch this unprecedented interaction between guard and child. Instead of the usual tourist photos and casual observations, people stood quietly, sensing they were witnessing something genuinely special. Parents lifted their own children for better views, whispering explanations about why this moment was so remarkable. Even cynical adults found themselves moved by the boy's obvious joy and the guard's gentle responses to his admiration. Timothy's grandmother approached the fence and began speaking softly to Michael, explaining her grandson's story in greater detail. She told him about Timothy's father serving overseas, about the boy's nightly prayers for all soldiers and guards, about the months he had spent creating the tiny uniform with materials gathered from around their modest home. She spoke of his unwavering belief that the royal guards were the finest soldiers in the world, protectors of everything good and noble. Michael listened to every word while maintaining his official position, his heart growing heavier with each detail of Timothy's story. Here was a family that had sacrificed so much for their country, a child who faced daily challenges with remarkable grace, a grandmother who had traveled far on limited resources to fulfill her grandson's dream of meeting his heroes. The weight of their trust and admiration felt more significant than any medal or commendation he had ever received. The boy held up his handmade uniform higher, hoping the guard could see every detail he had worked so hard to perfect. Timothy's eyes sparkled with anticipation, not because he expected anything in return, but because he wanted to share his creation with someone who would truly understand its meaning. The tiny uniform represented everything he admired about the guards: their dedication, their courage, their service to something greater than themselves. Michael made a decision that would later be debated in military circles and celebrated in human interest stories around the world. Very slowly and deliberately he took a small step forward, not breaking his post, but moving just close enough to acknowledge Timothy's gift properly. It was a calculated risk that could result in disciplinary action, but the guard understood that some moments in life demand we choose humanity over regulations. The crowd held its breath as they watched Michael's subtle movement toward the fence, toward the boy who had waited his entire young life for this moment of connection with his heroes. Timothy's face lit up with wonder and disbelief, understanding that this brave guard was willing to bend the rules to honor his gesture of respect and gratitude. Michael reached the fence and, in a moment that would be remembered forever, gently accepted Timothy's handmade uniform through the iron bars. The guard's large gloved hands carefully cradled the tiny creation as if it were made of the most precious materials in the crown jewels. Timothy's eyes filled with tears of pure joy as he watched his gift being received with such reverence and respect by one of his heroes. The crowd around them had grown considerably, but the atmosphere remained hushed and reverent. People instinctively understood they were witnessing something sacred, a moment when military discipline and human compassion merged perfectly. Phones were put away, conversations ceased, and even the most restless children stood quietly as they watched the gentle exchange between the towering guard and the small boy in the wheelchair. Michael examined every detail of Timothy's creation, his trained eyes recognizing the hours of meticulous work that had gone into crafting each tiny button, each perfect fold of fabric. The guard understood that this wasn't just a gift. It was a labor of love, a tribute to everything the Royal Guards represented, created by hands that would never wear a real uniform, but possessed a spirit worthy of any regiment in the world. Timothy began speaking in whispered tones, his voice barely audible but his words carrying the weight of months of preparation and years of dreams. He explained each part of the uniform to Michael, pointing out details he had researched and recreated, sharing stories about what each element meant to him. The boy's knowledge of Royal Guard traditions and history was remarkable, gleaned from books, documentaries, and countless hours of devoted study. The grandmother watched with tears streaming down her cheeks as her grandson experienced the fulfillment of his greatest wish. She had worried about this trip, concerned that Timothy might be disappointed or ignored, that his disability might prevent him from getting close enough to truly appreciate the guards he admired so deeply. Instead, she was witnessing her grandson receive recognition and respect from the very people he held in highest regard. Other guards along the fence found themselves deeply moved by what they were observing. These were men trained to maintain discipline under any circumstances, to remain unmoved by external events, to uphold their posts regardless of distractions. Yet here they stood, watching their colleague demonstrate that true strength sometimes lies in gentle kindness, that real honor comes from recognizing honor in others, regardless of age or physical ability. Michael carefully folded Timothy's note and tucked it safely inside his tunic, close to his heart. The simple act carried profound symbolism. This child's words of gratitude and admiration would literally stay with the guard throughout his duty, a reminder of why their service mattered to the people they protected. Timothy beamed with pride, understanding that his message would remain with his hero throughout the day. A palace official had noticed the commotion and was making his way through the crowd, his expression suggesting concern about protocol breaches. Michael was aware of the approaching authority figure, but remained focused on Timothy, understanding that this moment was more important than any potential consequences he might face. The boy had traveled far and waited long for this encounter, and the guard was determined to make it as meaningful as possible. Timothy suddenly reached into his bag again and pulled out something else, a photograph of his father in military uniform, taken before his overseas deployment. With shaking hands, the boy showed the picture to Michael, explaining that his father had taught him about honor, duty, and service to country. The child's voice broke with emotion as he spoke about missing his father and how watching the Royal Guards helped him feel connected to the military traditions his family served. Michael felt the full weight of responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. This wasn't just about ceremony or tradition. It was about representing hope and stability to people like Timothy, about embodying the values that military families sacrifice to protect. The guard realized that every day he stood at his post, he carried the dreams and admiration of countless children who saw in the Royal Guards everything noble and good about service to others. The boy's grandmother approached the fence and quietly thanked Michael for his kindness, explaining that this moment would stay with Timothy for the rest of his life. She spoke about the challenges they faced, the medical appointments and treatments, the financial struggles of a military family, and how Timothy's fascination with the Royal Guards provided light during difficult times. The guard understood that his simple gestures of acknowledgement had given this family something precious: validation, joy, and unforgettable memories. As the palace official drew closer, Michael made one final decision that would complete this extraordinary encounter. Reaching into his own pocket, he pulled out a small pin from his uniform, a regimental insignia that held deep meaning for any Queen's Guard. Without hesitation, he gently passed the pin through the fence to Timothy, whose eyes widened with disbelief at receiving such a treasured gift from his hero. Timothy held the regimental pin with reverence that would have impressed the most senior officers in the British Army. His small fingers traced the intricate details of the insignia as tears of overwhelming gratitude flowed down his cheeks. The boy understood the significance of what he had just received: a piece of history, a symbol of honor, a tangible connection to the brotherhood of guards he admired so deeply. This wasn't just a pin. It was recognition that he possessed the spirit of a true guardsman. The palace official who had been approaching stopped in his tracks as he witnessed the exchange, his initial concern about protocol violations giving way to recognition of something far more important unfolding before him. Captain Harrison had served 30 years in various military capacities before joining the palace administration, and he immediately understood the profound nature of what he was observing. This wasn't a breach of duty. This was duty elevated to its highest form. Michael carefully returned to his position, but his posture had changed subtly. The rigid military bearing remained, but there was now a warmth in his stance that spoke of a guard who had remembered why he served. Other guards along the fence had witnessed the entire exchange, and word was already spreading through their ranks about the boy who had created a uniform by hand and the colleague who had honored his gift with such grace and humanity. Timothy clutched the regimental pin to his chest and began speaking earnestly to his grandmother, his voice filled with excitement and wonder. He wanted to tell everyone about what had just happened, about how the guard had accepted his gift and given him something precious in return. The boy's joy was infectious, bringing smiles to the faces of onlookers who had remained to witness this touching conclusion to an extraordinary encounter. Captain Harrison approached the fence where Timothy sat with his grandmother, his own military bearing evident as he introduced himself. Instead of reprimanding anyone for protocol breaches, the seasoned officer knelt down to Timothy's level and began asking about his handmade uniform, expressing genuine admiration for the craftsmanship and attention to detail. The boy eagerly explained his creation, his confidence growing as he spoke with another military professional who appreciated his work. The grandmother found herself overwhelmed by the kindness being shown to her grandson. She had expected a brief visit to see the guards from a distance, perhaps a quick photo opportunity before returning to their modest hotel. Instead, Timothy was experiencing recognition and respect from the very people he idolized, validation that his dreams and admiration were worthy and important. The elderly woman struggled to find words adequate to express her gratitude. Michael stood at his post, but his awareness was heightened to everything happening around Timothy and Captain Harrison. He could hear the officer explaining various aspects of Royal Guard traditions to the boy, answering questions with patience and enthusiasm that matched Timothy's eager curiosity. The guard realized that this encounter was creating ripples far beyond the initial exchange. It was becoming a moment of education, inspiration, and human connection. Word of the remarkable interaction began spreading beyond the immediate crowd. Other visitors to the palace started gathering, drawn by rumors of something special happening at the fence. Social media posts began appearing, sharing images and videos of the boy with his handmade uniform and the guard who had acknowledged his gesture. The story was taking on a life of its own, touching hearts around the world. Timothy showed Captain Harrison his father's photograph, explaining his family's military connection and his dreams of following in those footsteps, despite his physical limitations. The officer listened with growing respect for this young boy who understood service and sacrifice beyond his years. Captain Harrison began sharing stories of other brave individuals who had served their country in various capacities, emphasizing that courage comes in many forms. The crowd watched as Captain Harrison made his own gesture of respect and recognition. Removing one of his own service ribbons, he carefully pinned it to Timothy's shirt, explaining that it represented years of dedicated service and that Timothy had earned the right to wear it through his own demonstration of courage, respect, and determination. The boy's eyes widened with disbelief at receiving a second honor from these military professionals he held in such high regard. Other guards began making subtle adjustments to their positions, not breaking protocol but shifting slightly to acknowledge the special visitor in their midst. It was a collective recognition of Timothy's character and his genuine appreciation for their service. The boy noticed these small movements and gestures, understanding that he was being welcomed into a brotherhood that transcended physical limitations or formal enlistment. As the afternoon progressed, Timothy's story continued to unfold in remarkable ways. Visitors who learned about his handmade uniform and his family's military service began approaching to offer their own thanks and encouragement. The boy found himself at the center of a growing circle of support and admiration, his humble gift having sparked something much larger than he could have imagined. Michael remained at his post throughout these developments, but his heart swelled with pride at what his simple acknowledgement had set in motion. The guard realized that by choosing humanity over rigid protocol, he had created something beautiful, a moment when the best of military tradition combined with the pure spirit of a child to create an experience that would inspire and touch countless lives around the world. As evening approached and Timothy's magical day at the palace drew to a close, the impact of his encounter with the royal guards had grown far beyond anything anyone could have anticipated. News outlets around the world had picked up the story of the boy who made a tiny uniform and the guards who honored his gift with unprecedented kindness. Social media was flooded with images and videos of the encounter, touching millions of hearts and sparking conversations about compassion, service, and the power of simple human connections. Timothy sat in his wheelchair, wearing both the regimental pin from Michael and the service ribbon from Captain Harrison, his face glowing with happiness that seemed to illuminate everything around him. The handmade uniform he had created now rested in a place of honor within the palace walls where Captain Harrison had promised it would be displayed as a testament to the spirit of service that transcends age, ability, and circumstance. The boy could hardly believe his simple creation had found such a meaningful home. Michael completed his shift knowing that his life had been changed by this encounter, just as much as Timothy's had been. The guard realized that sometimes the greatest service comes not from following rules blindly, but from understanding the heart behind those rules and acting with wisdom and compassion. His decision to acknowledge Timothy's salute and accept his gift had created a ripple effect that would inspire people around the world and remind them of the humanity that exists within even the most formal institutions. The grandmother prepared to wheel Timothy away from the palace, but the boy asked for one more moment to look at his heroes standing proudly at their posts. He understood now that being a guard wasn't just about wearing a uniform or following protocols. It was about representing the best of human nature, about protecting not just buildings or people, but the ideals and values that make society worth preserving. Timothy had learned that courage comes in many forms, and that recognition and respect are gifts that transcend physical limitations. Captain Harrison approached the family as they prepared to leave, carrying with him something that would complete this extraordinary day. He presented Timothy with an official certificate recognizing him as an honorary friend of the Royal Guards, signed by senior officials and bearing the palace seal. The document acknowledged Timothy's courage, his respect for military tradition, and his inspiring demonstration of the values that the guards themselves strive to embody. It was an unprecedented honor that left the boy speechless with joy. As Timothy and his grandmother finally departed, every guard along the fence stood a little straighter, served with a little more purpose and carried in their hearts the reminder of why their duty mattered. The boys' pure admiration and selfless gift had rekindled something precious in these professional soldiers, the understanding that they served not just the crown, but the dreams and hopes of people like Timothy who looked to them as symbols of honor and protection. The story of Timothy and the Royal Guard spread around the world, becoming a beacon of hope and humanity in an often cynical age. Military personnel from various countries reached out to share similar experiences. Parents told their children about the importance of recognizing service and sacrifice, and educators used the story to teach lessons about courage, kindness, and the power of simple gestures to change lives. Michael returned to his duties in the following days with a renewed sense of purpose and pride. He carried Timothy's note close to his heart throughout every shift, a constant reminder that their service touched lives in ways they might never fully understand. The Guard had learned that true strength lies not in rigid adherence to rules, but in the wisdom to know when humanity demands something greater than protocol. Months later, Timothy received a package at his home, photographs of his handmade uniform displayed in its place of honor within the palace, along with letters from guards around the world who had been inspired by his story. The boy had touched something universal in the human spirit, reminding people everywhere that respect, courage, and kindness are qualities that transcend all boundaries and limitations. The encounter between Timothy and the Royal Guards became legendary within military circles, taught as an example of how true service encompasses not just duty to country, but compassion for fellow human beings. It demonstrated that sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen not on battlefields, but in quiet moments when we choose to see and honor the humanity in others, regardless of their age, ability, or circumstances. Years would pass, but the memory of that extraordinary day would remain vivid for everyone who witnessed it. Timothy grew up carrying the values he had learned from his heroes, understanding that true honor comes from service to others, and that recognition of courage is one of the greatest gifts we can offer. The Royal Guards continued their duties, with the knowledge that their service carried meaning far beyond ceremony, that they represented hope and inspiration to countless individuals who looked to them as examples of the very best in human nature.